Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, more than 100 arrests made so far since President Trump's D.C. crime crackdown. That's according to the White House. And starting tonight, the city is expected to see even more National Guard members on the ground. Jason Blair has more on the president's efforts to improve public safety in the nation's capital. President Trump names this year's Kennedy Center honorees and unveils big renovation plans as the White House launches a review of D.C. museums ahead of America's 250th birthday. Mari Otsu at the White House. President Trump warns Russia of severe consequences if no peace progress is made on Friday. Arian Pozdar has what else Trump says about the upcoming summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin. President Trump wins an appeal to resume his freeze on foreign aid spending. A D.C. panel said the groups that filed the lawsuit couldn't challenge the president's powers. Arlene Richards with more on the court's decision. And heavy rain and flash flooding have devastated Chattanooga, Tennessee, killing at least 3 people. Search and rescue operations continue as the region faces a second day of heavy rainfall. Christina Corona reports.
This is NTD Evening News, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening and thank you for joining us tonight. 400 National Guard members are expected to be deployed in Washington, D.C. tonight. The White House says more than 100 arrests have been made so far since President Trump's latest clampdown on crime in the nation's capital. NTD correspondent Jason Blair has the update.
A White House official told NTD that the National Guard troops in Washington, D.C. will be increasing from 30 to 400 starting Wednesday night. The statement says that the total number for Tuesday's operations was 1,450 law enforcement officers. That's combining numbers from all groups and agencies participating. The White House says since August 7th, just over 100 people have been arrested in the capital city. This includes 23 on Monday and 43 on Tuesday. Of the 43, the statement says that most were related to firearm offenses, as well as 23 illegal immigrant arrests. The crackdown is tied to the Make the District of Columbia Beautiful task force that the president created with an executive order in March. On Monday, Trump announced that he's bringing Washington, D.C.'s police under federal control. The move is possible under Section 740 of the District of Columbia Home Rule Act for 30 days in emergency situations. The White House says that the planned operations are going to move from operating at night to operating 24 hours a day. White House Border Czar Tom Homan says that he agrees with Trump's move.
Look, I know they've taken some bad people off the street, but in addition to that, I think it sends a strong message of consequences. I mean, deterrence. I think a lot of the criminals are staying off the street because they know there's an increased presence of law enforcement.
Homan also mentioned on Tuesday that ICE will be involved in Washington, D.C. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem announced that ICE was deployed into the city on August 11th. Looking forward, President Trump says that he's eyeing a crime bill.
And it's going to pertain initially to D.C. We're going to be asking for extensions on that, long-term extensions, because you can't have 30 days.
And the president says that declaring a state of emergency isn't off the table either.
We're going to want extensions. I don't want to call national emergency. If I have to, I will.
Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
With President Trump saying he might extend federal policing in D.C. past 30 days, will Congress do anything to back him up? Tonight, hear from Representative Mark Harris on Capitol Report at 7 p.m. Eastern. Don't miss it. President Trump revealing the Kennedy Center honorees today and announcing his vision for the Performing Arts Center's renovation. This while the White House orders a review of D.C. museums ahead of the nation's 250th birthday. NTD's Washington correspondent Mari Otsu has more from the White House.
But as I said earlier, I'm determined to make Washington, D.C. safe, clean, and beautiful again. It's going to take place very rapidly. Be prepared. And a big part of that's going to include the Kennedy Center.
President Trump announcing this year's Kennedy Center honorees and saying he'll host the Kennedy Center honors himself this December. This comes after the president overhauled the Kennedy Center's leadership in February, criticizing the center for what he called its promotion of anti-American propaganda, like drag shows targeting children.
A few short months ago, I became chairman of the Kennedy Center. We ended the woke political programming, and we're restoring the Kennedy Center as the premier venue for performing arts anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world.
President Trump announced today honorees actor Sylvester Stallone, recording artist George Strait and Gloria Gaynor, British actor Michael Crawford, and the rock band Kiss. The president said funding for renovations of the center has been secured, and next season all seats will be replaced with brand new ones.
Taking care of the great gem that it is. You look at the marble, look at the quality of the marble and the things that with a little fix-up and a little work we can make it unbelievable. These columns, when you see them the next time, they'll be magnificent.
And in other efforts to prepare for America's 250th birthday, the White House announced a comprehensive review of Smithsonian Museum exhibitions and materials. The Smithsonian is the world's largest museum, education, and research complex and receives over $1 billion taxpayer dollars each year. White House officials say in a letter that the review aims to ensure that our national museums reflect the unity and values that define the American story. The letter references President Trump's executive order from March called Restoring Truth and Sanity to American History, which states that museums in our nation's capital should be places where individuals go to learn, not to be subjected to ideological indoctrination or divisive narratives that distort our shared history. President Trump signed an executive order in January establishing a White House task force celebrating America's 250th birthday, which the White House said fulfills the president's 2024 campaign pledge.
But that's why, as a nation, we should be preparing for a most spectacular birthday party. We want to make it the best of all time.
In other renewal efforts, President Trump in June funded the installation of 2 new flagpoles on the White House South Lawn, and in July announced the renovation of the White House ballroom. The president also donated his first presidential paycheck this term to the White House Historical Association. President Trump has a history of donating his salary in his first term to agencies including the National Park Service and Department of Veterans Affairs. Reporting from the White House, Mariotsu, NTD News.
And we're just 2 days away from the historic summit between President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin. Trump now warns of consequences for Russia if no progress is made at the meeting on Friday. NTD's international correspondent, Arian Pozdar, has the latest on the upcoming talks.
Yes, they will. Yeah.
What will the consequences
there will be
be?
consequences.
Sanctions, tariffs?
There will be, I don't have to say, there will be very severe consequences, yes.
President Trump on Wednesday saying there will be severe consequences for Russia if no peace progress is made. The comment comes just 2 days before Trump is scheduled to meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin. European allies, along with Ukraine, have been calling on Trump to include Kiev in the peace process. Trump now says there could be a trilateral meeting shortly after Friday's summit.
If the first one goes okay, we'll have a quick second one. I would like to do it almost immediately, and we'll have a quick second meeting between President Putin and President Zelensky and myself if they'd like to have me there.
Trump suggested that a single meeting would not be enough. Also on Wednesday, Trump had a phone call with European allies and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
We had a very good call.
Zelensky commented on the call and the upcoming meeting.
I told the U.S. president that Putin is bluffing. He's currently trying to put on pressure along all parts of the Ukrainian front. Russia is trying to show that it can occupy all of Ukraine.
The Chancellor of Germany says European leaders laid out several points they want Trump to keep in mind as he prepares for Friday's summit.
Ukraine has to be part of future negotiations as soon as more talks are being scheduled. We also want there to be an order to the negotiations. A ceasefire has to come before anything else.
He added 3 more points. One is that Europe is not open to acknowledge Russia's occupation of Ukrainian territory, saying borders cannot be changed through violence. Another point is that negotiations must include security guarantees for Ukraine, so Kiev can keep defending itself in the future. This includes being able to count on support from the West. The last point the Chancellor made is that pressure on Russia has to be increased if no breakthrough is made after the talks on Friday. NATO Chief Mark Rutte also joined Wednesday's conversation. He says he appreciates Trump's leadership and close coordination with allies. The ball is now in Putin's court. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
A recent report alleges that a UN partner organization changed its criteria for what constitutes a famine just before declaring one in the Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, some truck drivers in the territory share their experiences of what it's like to deliver aid. NTD's Jason Perry has the update.
More footage was released of residents in the Gaza Strip swarming trucks carrying humanitarian aid. In an incident too graphic to show on screen, an injured man lay on the ground covered in what appeared to be dust and flour. He lay on his back while holding onto an empty wooden pallet while others walked around him. Some may be wondering what it's like for the truck drivers who apparently risked their lives to deliver aid to the territory.
People come with sticks and pipes, puncturing tires, blocking the roads, as you can see, puncturing the tires. I don't know what the driver's carrying. Is he bringing gold or something?
We tell people, help us, because if the crowd helps us unload without harming the drivers, we can come back with another load, maybe even one more. When things go smoothly, we can do 2 or 3 runs a day.
In a related development, the Washington Free Beacon reports that the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, or IPC, changed one of its metrics before declaring a famine in the Gaza Strip. The report says that the IPC, which partners with several UN programs, previously declared a famine in an area where more than 30% of children suffered from malnutrition, and that it used this standard in the Gaza Strip and other conflict zones, such as Somalia, South Sudan, and Sudan. The Free Beacon reports that the IPC recently lowered this metric to 15%, allowing them to declare a famine in Gaza City, which reportedly had a malnutrition level of 16.5%. We reached out to the IPC for comment about the change in criteria, but we didn't hear back before airtime. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said hundreds of trucks carrying humanitarian aid are now entering the Gaza Strip daily.
The only deliberate starvation policy that we see in Gaza is the starving of our hostages. And you can see that when you look at their captors.
On the same day, the family of Nepalese hostage Bipin Joshi visited the Israeli village where he was taken hostage. Joshi's family was shown the video of the moment Hamas terrorists kidnapped him on October 7th.
We don't know where he is and is he getting food. It's my request to the government of Hamas. We have no anything. We don't want anything from anyone. We are innocent one. Please let him go.
50 hostages are believed to still be held in the Gaza Strip. Israeli officials have said that 20 of them are believed to still be alive. Jason Perry, NTD News.
A victory today for the Trump administration. The majority on a D.C. appeals court panel said the administration can resume its freeze on foreign aid spending. NTD's Arlene Richards has more on the court's reasoning and the dissenting opinion.
A legal roadblock is no longer legal. A federal appeals court ruled Wednesday that President Trump doesn't have to keep making foreign aid payments. A 3-judge panel at the D.C. Court of Appeals ruled that a lower district court abused its discretion and shouldn't have ordered the payments. The higher court said the groups who brought the lawsuit don't have a cause of action, meaning they are not the right parties to bring the constitutional claims they raised. The parties are a group of organizations that were receiving foreign assistance funds. By executive order, President Trump called for a pause of up to 90 days to evaluate foreign spending programs. Then the State Department suspended new funding to foreign aid programs. And thousands of foreign aid awards were paused or terminated. The groups filed a lawsuit making several statutory and constitutional claims, including that the executive branch had violated separation of powers law. The lower court ruled that the president had failed to follow certain requirements for freezing funds appropriated by Congress and therefore had likely violated other laws raised by the groups. The appeals panel said these groups are not likely to succeed at trial because they were not allowed to assert constitutional rights where there was no real injury to those rights. It said they offensively used constitutional claims in order to challenge the president's power to freeze funds. Attorney General Pam Bondi called the ruling another Justice Department victory in court for President Trump's agenda. One judge on the panel disagreed with the decision. Judge Florence Pan said the government didn't raise arguments about the plaintiffs' constitutional claims, yet the majority ruled in their favor on that key argument. She said when a president refuses to spend funds appropriated by Congress based on policy disagreements, that should raise constitutional alarm bells. The majority sent the statutory claims back to the district court for further proceedings. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
At least 3 people were killed as heavy rain and flash floods tore through Chattanooga, Tennessee overnight, closing highways and trapping vehicles. Swift water rescue teams raced to help stranded motorists and locals trapped in their homes. NTD's Christina Corona tells us more.
Heavy rain and flash flooding have devastated Chattanooga, Tennessee, killing at least 3 people. A family of 2 adults and a child died when a tree fell on their car in the East Ridge area. Authorities are still searching for a man who went missing after walking into the floodwaters Tuesday night and has not been seen since. Flooding closed parts of Interstate 24 and left streets and homes submerged in muddy water. Firefighters and water rescue teams helped stranded residents and motorists using boats and inflatable rafts. Hamilton County Mayor Weston Wamp declared a local state of emergency as the region braces for more heavy rainfall. 6 million people across much of Tennessee and eastern Kentucky are under a flood watch. The National Weather Service has placed much of Middle Tennessee under a flood watch through Wednesday night, warning that tropical-like downpours could lead to scattered flash floods and repeated storms, especially in areas already drenched. Officials urge residents to stay alert and avoid flooded areas as rescue and recovery efforts continue. On Tuesday, Chattanooga Airport recorded 6.42 inches of rain, the city's second wettest day on record. Christina Corona, NTD News.
Coming up, the U.S. Navy sends 2 warships to the South China Sea. They were deployed to the same area where 2 Chinese military ships collided while chasing down a Philippine Coast Guard vessel this week. Jack Bradley reports. What is the former deputy president of Kenya doing in the U.S.? He tells David Lamb about alleged abductions in his country, as well as a Chinese invasion. Members of Congress are expected to reauthorize the Defense Production Act, a key tool to counter China's growing threat when they return from recess. Luis Eduardo Martinez has more on the legislation. And amid high-stakes trade negotiations with the Chinese regime, the White House is looking to expand a deal with U.S. companies selling to China. Lawmakers are raising questions coming up. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. The U.S. today deployed 2 warships to the South China Sea. This follows an incident in which 2 Chinese military ships collided while pursuing a Philippine military vessel. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has the details.
The U.S. Navy sending 2 warships to the South China Sea on Wednesday, the same area where 2 Chinese military ships crashed into each other when they were chasing down a Philippine Coast Guard vessel this week. The U.S. ships were deployed following this incident, carrying out an infrequent freedom of navigation exercise, but they were trailed by a Chinese Navy vessel. The Chinese Communist Party says it chased away the American ships, but a Navy spokesperson denies this, saying in a statement to the U.S. Naval Institute News, China's statement about this mission is false. The USS Higgins conducted the freedom of navigation exercise in accordance with international law and then continued on to conduct normal operations.
Part of the reason you do these freedom of navigation operations is to be seen. But what it really demonstrated was that the United States has forward deployed capabilities, that it has a treaty alliance with the Philippines, it stands with our ally.
On the same day, a Chinese fighter jet intercepted a Philippine aircraft carrying journalists during a patrol flight. At one point, the Chinese jet came within 200 feet, maneuvering around the Philippine jet, an encounter lasting 20 minutes. The moves come after the Philippine Coast Guard on Monday was trying to carry out a resupply mission, and they were blocked by a Chinese Coast Guard vessel, all right before a Chinese Navy ship accidentally crashes into the Chinese Coast Guard vessel. The impact left large dents on both Chinese ships. The U.S. ambassador to the Philippines, Mary Kay Carlson, condemned the collision as the latest reckless action by China directed against a Philippine vessel. China has a history of ramming Philippine Coast Guard vessels and blocking them from carrying out such supply missions. China claims the South China Sea as its own, even though a 2016 international tribunal ruling found that China's blockade of the region was unlawful. But the Chinese regime regime rejects that ruling and has constantly been deploying military ships to the region. Reporting by Jack Bradley, NTD News.
A Kenyan politician came to the United States recently and is speaking out about abductions in his country. The former deputy president of Kenya says protesters have been going missing after criticizing the government. He also says the level of Chinese influence in the African nation is rising. NTD's David Lamb has the story.
Rigathi Gachagua, former deputy president of Kenya, has been in the U.S. for over a month meeting with Kenyan people. He hopes for Kenyans to appeal to U.S. senators and representatives to bring attention to human rights violations in his country. Gachagua told NTD that protesters have been abducted after criticizing the Kenyan government.
Mostly the ones who have been targeted are young children between the ages of 14 to 24 who are very active on social media, who have been calling out the government, who have been condemning abductions, who have been condemning theft of public funds, and those young adults are targeted by the state for repression. They are arrested and tortured. Some are killed, some are shot.
The Kenya Human Rights Commission has tried to piece together statistics about children who have died. Gachagua said about 300 have disappeared and over 100 dead. Current President William Ruto pledged in 2024 that abductions will not happen under his watch. But Gachagua claims the recent abductions have occurred since 2024, and the locals used social media to complain about the issues that disturb them in Kenya, including loans taken from communist China. Kenya is 12 trillion in debt in shillings, Kenyan currency, which is equivalent to 92 billion US dollars.
We are concerned as a country about the Chinese invasion to Kenya. It's economic invasion by the Chinese people to Kenya and has literally reduced our business people into beggars. The Chinese people have come and taken over even small businesses.
Gachagua claims that Chinese contractors have started construction businesses and living units in Kenya, but the earnings get sent back to China.
It's just too much pressure. The Chinese are very strong because of the kind of money they bring into the country. They have literally compromised everybody, so nobody wants to listen to what we are saying. So the Kenyan people are, they are in a very difficult situation. Because the government officials are the ones who are doing business with the Chinese.
David Lamb, NTD News, California.
Congress is in recess, but lawmakers are preparing to tackle critical defense legislation before September 30th. Our Washington correspondent, Luis Eduardo Martinez, has the details.
Enacted in 1950 during the Korean War, DPA was designed to secure America's industrial base for national emergencies, prioritizing domestic production over foreign reliance. Today, as our dependence on foreign critical materials, semiconductors, rare earth materials, pharmaceuticals grows, the DPA's importance is undeniable.
The Defense Production Act is set to expire on September 30th. It has been reauthorized some 50 times since the 1950s and has been modified in recent years to include the hypersonic industrial base, pharmaceutical supply chain, rare earth minerals, and nuclear submarines.
America is navigating one of the most dangerous and complex global threat environments in recent history. Our adversaries are accelerating innovation, scaling production, and heavily investing in their national defense capabilities. It's critical that America keeps pace and expands our dominance as the leader in the free world.
Currently, war economies like Russia's produce more ammunition shells than the U.S. and its European allies combined. Last year alone, Russia increased its missile production by 66%.
Our current priorities are critical minerals, missiles and munitions are at the top of our list. Minerals and materials are at the basis and the fundamental nature of everything that we do.
China, for example, controls 85% of rare earth mineral processing worldwide and has invested over 40 times more money on rare earth minerals than the U.S. has since 2020. Without the Defense Production Act investments, it would take several decades for the U.S. to catch up.
One thing this Congress has worked very, very hard on, as well as the administration, is improving government efficiency, getting rid of waste, just trying to cut through the bureaucracy. If there are things that would require congressional action that would get rid of some of the shackles that are slowing the ability to be more nimble and respond.
Lawmakers are seeking to modify the Defense Production Act to simplify contracting, accelerate procurement, and remove barriers like clean energy requirements to create a defense supply chain ready to face U.S. adversaries like Russia and China. Congress is expected to reauthorize the Defense Production Act before September 30th. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
Amid high-stakes trade negotiations with the Chinese regime, the White House is looking to expand a deal involving U.S. companies selling to China. It allows chip-making companies to avoid export controls. Lawmakers are raising concerns about national security and the legality of the deal. NTD's Melina Weisskopf has the report.
After previously banning the sale of AI chips to China, Trump made a deal to allow U.S. chip makers NVIDIA and AMD to sell certain chips to China if they pay the U.S. government a slice of their profits. Under the new deal, NVIDIA and AMD will pay 15% of their revenues from China H20 chip sales to the U.S. government, this in exchange for U.S. export licenses. And yesterday, the press secretary at the White House said this type of deal could be expanded.
Right now, it stands with these two companies. Perhaps it could expand in the future to other companies. I think it's a creative idea and solution. The legality of it, the mechanics of it is still being ironed out by the Department of Commerce.
Now, lawmakers in Congress aren't necessarily happy with this. Leaders of the House's Select Committee on the CCP are raising national security concerns. The ranking member wants to take action to prevent these types of deals in the future.
I'm going to introduce legislation to require congressional approval for the sale of these types of chips to the CCP and adversaries. I just asked the question, what's next? Is he going to sell aircraft carriers to them for a 15% tip? Is he going to...
And the chairman of the committee, John Molinar, a Republican, said there's a legality question at play. He said, quote, and we should not set a precedent that incentivizes the government to grant licenses to sell China technology that will enhance its AI capabilities. This deal comes at a sensitive moment in U.S.-China trade talks. The Trump administration just extended a trade truce with the regime for another 90 days. The Treasury Secretary described all of this negotiating as a chess game.
China's like a multi-level chess game. It's our biggest economic rival and our biggest military rival. So we're solving for several variables here.
Chinese leader Xi Jinping and President Trump might have a summit later this year. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
Coming up, a closer look at President Trump's nominee for the new Bureau of Labor Statistics Commissioner as the Heritage Foundation's chief economist. What would E.J. Antoni bring to the role, and what might the BLS look like under his leadership? Jeffrey Tucker from the Brownstone Institute joins us to discuss after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. President Trump said on Monday that he's nominating economist E.J. Antoni as the new Bureau of Labor Statistics Commissioner. Antoni is currently the chief economist at the Heritage Foundation, an influential conservative think tank. The announcement comes weeks after the president fired the previous BLS commissioner, Erica McIntyre, after the July jobs report alleging that she had manipulated data for political purposes. Joining us now to discuss is Jeffrey Tucker. He's the founder and president of the Brownstone Institute. Jeffrey, thank you so much for joining us. Great to see you as always. Now, President Trump said of E.J. Antoni's nomination that, quote, E.J. will ensure that the numbers released are honest and accurate. Now, Antoni has actually done a study for you at Brownstone to create a realistic measure on inflation. Talk to us about that study. What did Antoni do that's different from how inflation is currently calculated?
E.J. Antoni knows the BLS better than the BLS knows itself. He saw over 5 years all the manipulations. I had saw them taking place. And part of the problem was that the CPI would register a certain level of inflation, but industry would say something completely different. And you could see it in the housing prices. You could see it in used cars, in new cars, in groceries, in meats. And everything you would look at, the industry was reporting much higher numbers than the CPI, and we couldn't understand it. And I was going out of my mind because what the government says inflation is has a huge impact on taxes, on Social Security adjustments, on a whole range of business expectations. And Wall Street, it's a big deal. And I couldn't understand why the government numbers were so different from from industry numbers. Well, I went to E.J. Antoni and had him explain this to me, and he explained that, well, for one thing, in housing, they're using a very strange way to calculate inflation. They're looking at owner's equivalent rent, which is a sort of a new system gained up in 1983. They're not actually looking at house prices, much less the interest rate. And I noticed new studies coming out, one from Larry Summers from Harvard, that was observing that if you include interest in CPI, it completely changes the equation. And I wondered how much this was going on. There's other factors, too, that EJ was noticing. So when we went through 2 successive quarters in 2022 of declining real GDP, I asked him a question. What if we adjusted GDP by a realistic CPI using pre-1983 numbers on housing and using industry numbers for food, industry numbers for cars, include interest rates? I started throwing out all these things. He said, well, that would make an interesting study. So I commissioned him to just run the numbers as we described. He used very conservative estimates and didn't even follow all my suggestions. Like I wanted him to take government spending out of GDP and see what happens, right? Or include interest rates in the CPI. He didn't do those things. He just used very conservative recalculations and immediately generated what I suspected was the reality, which is that we had been in a technical recession since 2022 and really throughout the entire Biden era. So he wrote this study up for us. And it was really, I've never seen anything like it. When the study came out, I figured that, okay, the Wall Street Journal is going to headline this. Maybe the New York Times would run it, you know. Well, Epoch Times is the only one who even ran a story about it. Everybody else ignored it, but nobody had criticized it. I thought, well, this is strange. It's like everybody knows something, but nobody's willing to actually say it. Well, EJ also turns out to be an expert on the labor numbers, too. He had been noticing that there have been strange anomalies between the household survey and the establishment survey, numbers concerning the nativity of new workers. He was putting out data showing that all the new jobs were actually not, they were foreign born and not domestic jobs, which is interesting in its own right. And other factors too, like multiple job holders and these things. And he kept saying these numbers are not right. There's something wrong. So he spent 5 years digging through them. We had a sort of meeting of minds. I guess I consider him a little bit of my teacher, you know, on these things. And for Epoch, I must have written, I don't know, 30 articles on the topic. Well, in the course of all this writing, he has established himself as a leading, if not the leading expert on CPI, on GDP numbers, and on labor statistics, all the things that the BLS does. So Trump saw this and said, listen, why don't you come in and try to fix up this agency and see if we can fix our managerial problems and our methodological problems so the American people can have accurate data for the first time. I think it's a great decision. The decision is hugely controversial within the economics profession, of course, but I think it's the right one.
On that note, will Antoni be able to implement that type of calculation at the BLS?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that because I've never waltzed into an agency and been in charge of whatever it is, 25,000 people, you know, and a system that's 100 years old. With systems in place. So I don't know what he can do, really. I think he's going to be in a lot like a lot of these new appointees like Jay Bhattacharya at NIH or RFK at HHS. They're taking on, or the Department of Agriculture, they're taking on gigantic bureaucracies with large institutional knowledge and habits and things they just do without thinking. And I'm sure he's going to try. I saw that he was floating the idea of giving maybe a couple months where we don't report labor numbers, which actually this struck me as a great idea because the only thing worse than having labor numbers reported is having all the wrong numbers reported. So I would love to see something done about the anomalies we keep seeing in the data again and again. So extremely excited about what he can do there. I have to say, I'm glad it's not my job, but I'm really excited about what EJ can do.
On that note, though, what are maybe some of the biggest changes we could or should expect to see at the BLS under Antoni if he is confirmed?
I think I've not talked to him about it, but I think if it were up to me, I would go in there and first insist that, okay, don't change anything about the way you report CPI. Just keep doing the same thing you're doing, whatever. But let's have an alternative collection of data that uses private sources, private grocery prices, Zillow on homes. Let's add interest rates in there. Let's look at what used cars and new cars are going for on the market. Use something like the Trueflation measure. Figure out an alternative way to balance these things out. I noticed, for example, let me stop there. The real-time numbers we're seeing from private sources shows inflation way down. Okay, so their Trueflation is reporting about 1.8%. The new CPI just came in at 2.7%. Okay, well, maybe we just need an alternative CPI, call it CPI 2 or something else that's more realistic. Go back to a pre-1983 definition. Get rid of what they call hedonic adjustments, which I don't want to go into what that means, but let me just tell you there's a lot of trouble in hedonic adjustments. Get rid of those. Let's have an alternative version. On the labor data, maybe just reverse the way it keeps being reported. Like, we've got some very interesting data that you can get to concerning nativity of employees, multiple job holders, these kinds of things. Maybe just flip the reporting of those things and look to see what is real from fake numbers on the jobs numbers. And finding some way to reconcile the household survey and the establishment survey. One of the problems that the current BLS has is they can't get anybody to pick up the phone, right? So they call up establishments and say, how many employees do you have? Well, it rings and it rings, it goes to voicemail. Okay, so this keeps happening. We have very few businesses even reporting to the BLS. Okay, so maybe we can have a change in that system. Find out what's going wrong. Why aren't they picking up the phone? Maybe we develop some relationships with the 150 largest companies and extrapolate from that. That might be a good start. I'm not sure how it works, but we need alternative measures. I'm not entirely sure how to fix the system, but I will say this. Trump is the first president we've had in 100 years who's raised this question about the accuracy of the data and is hiring people to do something about it. I don't believe they can fix it right away. It's going to take some time, but at least there's an awareness for the first time that there is a major problem, and we have people that are being appointed now who can start to address the problem.
And speaking of those appointments, Jeffrey, it seems a lot of Brownstone people or affiliated are in the administration or being nominated. Does that make Brownstone more or less influential?
I will tell you what I said when I began to see all this start to unfold. I said to a group of people that were gathered, I said, we're losing half our power. And somebody said, that's a strange thing to say. Wouldn't you say you're gaining power? I prefer to see it that we're losing power. We're losing assets, to the government. So I need to start recruiting some more people so we can continue to stay on the cutting edge, I guess you would say.
Well, Jeffrey Tucker, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Coming up in baseball, Dodger star Shohei Ohtani is back on the mound tonight, still looking for his first win. Dave Martin joins us to discuss when we come back. for your sports news. We're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, plenty going on right now, but let's start in the NBA as the Portland Trail Blazers have reportedly reached an agreement to be sold for just over $4 billion. How does this compare to recent sales of NBA franchises?
Well, it seems to be, roughly in line with some recent sales. I mean, clearly not all franchises are going to be the same. The Los Angeles Lakers were the most recent franchise at $10 billion earlier this summer. I mean, that was the most ever. Now, the Boston Celtics were also sold in May for $6.1 billion. But those are the two most successful franchises in league history. The Celtics have 18 NBA titles. Lakers have 17. No one else even has more than 7. Of course, that's not all that matters, though. The Lakers still have that Showtime buzz, really, about them being located in LA, drawing numerous celebrities to their games. I would think only the New York Knicks could actually draw that kind of money, and really for the Knicks, it's only because they're located in downtown Manhattan. I believe they only have 2 NBA titles. Portland, meanwhile, just 1 NBA title. So I think it really shows just how valuable these franchises are overall, that they can draw this kind of money. Now, in any case, the deal was reported first by Sportico. It would still have to be approved by the NBA to actually make it official to get their $4 billion. So not a done deal yet, though.
All right, also lots of money in TV there. Looking at NFL news, though, the Buffalo Bills have signed running back James Cook to a 4-year deal. What does he mean to this team?
Well, quite frankly, a whole lot. I was actually surprised they gave extensions to a number of other players this offseason, but not Cook until now. And actually, Cook got the least amount of money here. But they finally got it done yesterday. Now, Cook made the Pro Bowl each of the last 2 seasons, also ran for more than 1,000 yards each of the last 2 seasons. He led the NFL with 16 rushing touchdowns last year. And he's only 25 years old. Now, his agents told ESPN this is a 4-year deal worth $48 million with $30 million guaranteed. Now, elsewhere in the league today, Cleveland Browns quarterback Shedeur Sanders suffered an oblique injury in practice this morning. He's already been ruled out for tomorrow's practice, and it seems, and they said it's unlikely he'll play in Saturday's preseason game against the Eagles. Now, it's very unfortunate for him. He had a very impressive showing last week against the Detroit Lions through a pair of touchdown passes. Really sort of great scrambling ability there. For the Browns, this is yet another quarterback injury. Now, last week, Kenny Pickett and Dylan Gabriel both were out with hamstring injuries. Of course, their starter, Deshaun Watson, will probably miss most of this season, of course, with that Achilles injury. So unfortunate for them, but they've got a lot of guys in the mix anyway. He's one of them, though.
All right, we'll watch. We'll watch for that. Shifting gears to tennis, though, 45-year-old Venus Williams was granted a wild card entry today to play in the U.S. Open, which starts later this month. What are you expecting to see from her based on her performance this season?
I think she could do pretty well here. I mean, she's played 3 singles matches this year, all against players ranked in the top 60 in the world. She's got a win and 2 losses. I mean, that's not bad at all, especially considering she had not played since March of 2024. Now, last month, she became the oldest woman in more than 20 years to win a tour-level singles match when she beat American Peyton Stearns at the DC Open. Now, she's lost her next 2 matches since, but she's still she's got a big serve. And this is a tournament she's won twice before. I mean, granted, she'll be the oldest singles player there since, I think it was 1981 when a 47-year-old, Renee Richards played there then. So I would not be surprised, if she actually got a win this time around here at the US Open. For sure, she is going to have the crowd on her side rooting for her there.
At least there's fan support always to count on. Moving to baseball news, speaking of fans, Dodgers two-way star Shohei Ohtani is on the mound tonight for LA as they play the Angels.
Yes, Ohtani, I know you're a big fan of him, of course. He makes his 9th start this season as a pitcher. Now, the Dodgers have brought him along pretty slowly so far to build up his endurance. The farthest he's lasted has been 4 innings. It certainly seems like he could go 5 tonight. I know they said there was a possibility in his last start. He's pitched very well, though, a 2.37 ERA on the season. No wins yet, though. You have to at least go 5 innings, of course, to get a win. As a hitter, though, he's definitely on fire, though, right now. He's got 4 home runs in 4 straight games. Now, this afternoon, we've also had a number of other games. Detroit shut out Chicago 1-0. The White Sox managed just 2 hits in that one. Colorado, worst team in the league, but they won 6-5 over St. Louis. And Washington Nationals beat Kansas City 8-7 this afternoon. Now, some other scores here. Pittsburgh lost to Milwaukee. That's Milwaukee's 12th win in a row. They have the best record in baseball right now. Arizona beat Texas 6-4, and San Diego beat San Francisco 11-1. So we've got that big game tonight still. Angels, Dodgers. That is at 9:30 Eastern time tonight. So watch out for that game there, Tiff.
Guess it's a late night for you then.
A late night for both of us. I know you're a big fan of the Dodgers and Ohtani, so there you go.
Well, Dave, as always, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome, Tiff.
And that's all for today's news. For on-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com/live or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.